BuildERS project aims to improve the overall resilience of European societies by reducing the vulnerability of those most vulnerable. I am Kati Orru from University of Tartu, Estonia, and I introduce the BuildERS approach to analyzing situations when and why people become vulnerable and innovating solutions for their better involvement in disaster risk governance. According to our analysis of European crisis management systems, in most countries, measures are planned around predetermined vulnerable groups, such as elderly or individuals with chronic diseases. The vulnerability of these groups is considered given, and they are expected to be rescued. In BuildERS, we challenge this understanding and focus on vulnerability as situations where anyone can find himself. We argue that by focusing on hazard and situation-specific factors of vulnerability, we achieve a more realistic understanding of sources of vulnerability, which can guide in reducing these situations and empowering individuals. In our analysis of situational vulnerabilities, we focus first on those that are commonly considered to live in already vulnerable life situations. The key questions are what factors render individuals vulnerable in crisis and what factors hinder their participation in disaster risk governance. Our survey on coping with COVID-19 among more than 300 clients of care organizations, homeless and rehabilitation shelters, soup kitchens all over Europe demonstrated that the crisis uncertainties particularly aggravated the situation of psychologically fragile clients. Home walls do not protect in what can be called a psychological catastrophe. By contrast, the clients that maintained access to their social networks in rehabilitation centers fared better. Stigmatization of the homeless and migrant communities during the pandemic hindered their participation in disaster risk reduction. Care organizations' own limited capacities and neglect by the official response made it difficult to meet the tremendous surge in demand for care. A different case, chemical spill preparedness drills in Finland, revealed communicative vulnerabilities. The limited access to information and understanding is particularly problematic among the individuals with memory and neuropsychiatric disorders and intellectual disabilities. Vulnerabilities are further aggravated by disaster management staff whose poor skills in communicating with these fragile individuals, while care organizations as middlemen remain underused. Second, we focus on disasters as situations where any resident can find himself. In a survey among the survivors displaced to temporary accommodations after 3 Italian earthquakes, we saw that particularly those that lack social networks and community attachment are the most vulnerable. The displacement's poor consideration of the requirements for social environment hinder survivors from benefiting from this disaster response measure. Our expert interviews and survey of German residents that had experienced Elbe flooding and COVID-19 demonstrated that the vulnerability of a person depends on the type of a disaster and resources like time that they had available to prepare, as well as the accessibility of social support networks in particular situation. The experienced management efforts often did not sufficiently consider social diversity. By contrast, discriminatory measures created vulnerability. For example, non-transparent masks disabled speech and hearing impaired persons. As a common trait in all the studied cases, one of the root causes of vulnerability seems to be the disjointed work of disaster management and social care. The analyzed cases confirm the need to move away from the vulnerable groups-based disaster risk governance dominating in many European countries. BuildERS proposes a novel vulnerability analysis tool that would bring to the focus the situation-specific vulnerabilities, particularly the functioning of informal and formal societal support structures that may range from inclusion and empowerment to discrimination and stigmatization. On the other hand, the technological side of social vulnerabilities cannot be neglected. In the intersecting of these 2 dimensions, we find 4 key spectrums of vulnerability: individual capacities and needs and beliefs, societal support networks, the accessibility and functionality of ties with family, community, or authorities, the critical services availability and accessibility, and last but not least, the functionality of public support structures, medical, social, rescue services, and information. We suggest that analyzing these spectrums of vulnerability factors intersecting in unique ways in specific crisis situations is a crucial step towards designing well-targeted, and more inclusive disaster risk reduction measures. Thank you for your attention.